Well, thanks everybody for being here. We're going to talk about a very, very exciting topic, which is the United States Congress. We've got a lot of folks up here. We've got really a majority, if not a plurality, of the folks that understand how technology works in the United States Congress. And my program, my organization, Tech Congress, we exist to help improve Congress's capacity to take on tech issues, to take on cybersecurity issues. And so I think we're going to talk a little bit about the nature of the problem, which probably all of us instinctively know, but we'll dig deep into it, and then really want to have provide an opportunity for Q&A about how you all can engage, because we need more people that understand technology and cybersecurity issues to be part of this conversation. Congress desperately needs it. So a little bit about the problem. A little bit about the problem, the nature of the problem. What is the problem? Chuck Schumer, our minority leader in the Senate, says he sends between 4 and 5 emails a year. Lindsey Graham ran for president of the United States, wears as a badge of honor that he doesn't use email. This is the level of familiarity that you have in the United States Congress on tech issues. And I should say, I think Chuck Schumer and Lindsey Graham are both great members of Congress. They're pragmatists, they're institutionalists, but they have very little understanding of how technology works. Who here watched the Facebook hearings? Question from the chairman of the Finance Committee. Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, I don't understand. How do you stay in business if you don't charge your users? Well, Senator, we run ads. This is the level of familiarity in Congress with how technology works. And at the staff level, it's not better. So there are 3,500 legislative staff in Congress, exactly 7 that have any formal technical background. Jessica's 1. The House is, generally speaking, much better than the Senate on this.
It's because he worked in the House.
No, it's 5 of the 7 are in the House. 2 are in the Senate. They're alumni of our program. But this matters, right? Because tech isn't just a slice of the policy pie. It's not health or education or finance. It's the crust of all of those issues. So our thesis is decent functional government in the 21st century requires this expertise in-house. And this was born based on my time as a staffer working in the House, working for a member that was on the same committee as Jessica. Snowden revelations in 2013 happened on like a Thursday. I found myself running around trying to understand what is metadata of phone records. I'm not technical. What are these NSA programs? What are the implications of the programs? So that I could advise my then boss, Representative Waxman, what was going on and what we should be thinking about that. There weren't people in the building that could explain those things to me. As a consequence, I had to go outside of Congress, and I went to a tech company. And they were more than happy to walk me through their view, many of these technical concepts, but also their point of view on the Snowden breach. So our thesis is that this needs to be in-house. So that's what we've set out to do. We place technologists to work with members of Congress through this 1-year fellowship. We've got 3 of them up here and 1 alumni, so they can speak to their experience. The goal is that we'll bring in technologists first to give a really, really great education into how Congress works. So you can think of this as like a master's degree in how Congress and government works. Second is to catalyze Congress to solve this problem for itself. Ultimately, we're not going to solve Congress's tech deficit with 50 fellows. No, Congress needs to prioritize and hire staff like Jessica so that every committee has a chief technologist in the same way that it has a chief counsel. And third is we want to build a program that can cycle in new expertise on an annual basis as technology changes, as technology evolves. The fourth thing we're trying to do is trying to build a sustainable model that we can take to governments everywhere. And Catherine is our a first grade example of this. So Catherine's a PhD student. She can talk a little bit more about it at University of Washington, studying neural privacy. And our hope is to build parallel programs in Congress, bringing in grad students. And then step 3 is to take this program to states and localities. The state of California, for example, they had 23 markups and hearings on drone bills alone last session. Not a single technical person on staff. So we've done this by modeling on existing congressional fellowships like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which has been bringing doctors into Congress for over 40 years. And I talked about our objectives a bit, some of our funders and our partners. So a couple quick case studies into the impact that some of our fellows have had. And I should say we're hiring. We're recruiting right now. So JC was one of our first-year fellows. JC was an identity management engineer at Microsoft, 20 years. He went to go work for the health subcommittee in the House and the Ways and Means Committee, and he worked on a couple things, electronic health record interoperability standards. So our health record systems should speak to one another. In fact, we spent nearly $30 billion in the stimulus, giving money back to hospitals and providers for EHR records to speak to one another. The vendors, there was not good language about what interoperability should be, and so in practice we don't have interoperability. He also worked on a proposal for unique identifiers on medical devices, like VIN numbers. We have a recall on pacemakers right now. You have a faulty pacemaker, guess what? We can put it on the nightly news. We don't have a way to reach out to you directly. So JC was a great original case study. John Costello went to work for the House Oversight Committee. His big charge, he led the investigation into the Office of Personnel Management breach. Anyone here a federal employee or have friends or family that are federal employees? So now all of our information is over with the Chinese, waiting who knows what. But John looked into the root causes of the breach and what we should be doing about that. He also set up a Congressional Tech Staff Association as a way for staffers to get educated on issues by experts like you all in the room. Sunmin Kim, one of our fellows last year, one of the things she worked on, open data standards. The Obama administration issued some big federal open data standards. She's worked on codifying that. So she got that passed out of the Senate, 89-8 last year. Sunmin is also working now full-time for Senator Schatz, working on emerging tech as her specific charge. And then Chris Segoyan. Some people, did anybody in the room know Chris? Chris was the chief technologist at the ACLU before the program. Chris thought he'd come into Congress, he'd get a bit of an education, he'd come out and he'd be a better activist. But within the first 2 months of Chris being in Congress, he'd gotten half a dozen things done that he'd spent the prior 4 years trying to get done at the ACLU. So he got advanced email encryption adopted at the Department of Defense, advanced email encryption adopted at the Department of Homeland Security. He got Signal approved, and he got a number of senators using it. He helped break a story about foreign intelligence services using fake cell towers in Washington, D.C. Stingray devices. This is an issue that DHS knew about but was not doing anything about. Chris, last November, when sexual harassment allegations were all over Congress, Chris walked into the Office of Compliance, the HR office in Congress, said, "Show me how you're recording these claims. Where are you recording them? Where are you storing them?" Found they were being stored on a third-party server off-site, minimally encrypted, no regular security checks. By the way, nobody knows how the John Conyers allegations got out. Got leaked to a right-wing blogger. Blogger won't say where he got the files from. Talk about a treasure trove if you're a foreign intelligence service. So fellows are able to do extraordinarily impactful work. We're growing. We've got some of our fellows up here growing that we can talk about and talk about the work that they're doing. And with that, I think we'll just kick it over to everybody, and maybe we can start with Jessica. Just talk about your work and how people can better the nature of the problem, how people can better engage with Congress.
Sure. So first things first, just to remind everyone, I'm not actually associated with the Tech Congress program. I do talk with Travis all the time to try and encourage him and explain how much I need backup. Just a little bit about me first. I'm a computer science and mathematics background from Syracuse University. Started working in Congress 5 years ago for the Energy and Commerce Committee, and that's a particularly interesting committee to work on tech issues with because it has such a broad jurisdiction. Healthcare, auto, electricity, commerce generally, IT, all of this falls into the Energy and Commerce's jurisdiction. So I work on a lot of different issues when it comes to tech. And I actually have to pause because I really need to give a shout out to my chairman. Chairman Walden is actually one of the smartest members in Congress when it comes to tech. He was a big radio guy back in his home state before he came to Congress, and he thankfully he gets it. But Travis is right. You know, Congress struggles a lot. I think you can see that sometimes in the hearings and the letters and other things that go out, the quotes that are given when these really complicated tech issues come up. And it's as a staffer, as one of the few, like Travis said, there's not a lot of us. It's me on the Energy and Commerce Committee. There's a Representative Langevins, legislative director, is another computer science major. Chris over in the Senate, and then some of the fellows here. But it's difficult when you're trying to work on tech issues and when you're trying to explain why they're important, and why they're critical, and why people should take time away from other issues to work on them, if you can't really delve deep into the tech and why it matters. And so the more allies that I have in other offices, which obviously we all have to collaborate if we're going to do anything, the better. It makes my life easier. It makes the policy better. It means Congress is more effective at what it's trying to do when it comes to tech. And so having fellows like the Tech Congress fellows is incredibly helpful. And I do want to highlight Chris Segoyan because I have really been kind of stunned by what Chris has been able to get done. He came in and he targeted some issues that were really unexpected when it came to issues that you think that somebody would want to work on Congress with. He works over in the Senate side, and he has just been pounding the Senate in terms of their cybersecurity controls. And it's not, company, you should go fix your cybersecurity because it's really poor. He actually went and looked at the Senate and said, we should probably clean up our own house first. So he's been pushing and pushing and pushing the Senate to do better, and it's working. I mean, Chris has gotten a lot done when it comes to the Senate's own cybersecurity, and I really think that's impressive. And so I want to highlight to everyone in the room and everyone who might be thinking of coming to Congress, of doing the Tech Congress Fellowship, or just getting involved however you want. You can make a really big difference, and you can do it in ways that you don't expect and in ways that have a huge impact on all kinds of issues, healthcare, auto, electricity, all these kinds of things. And we need all the help that we can get. So please consider coming to Congress. Please consider helping us out. And I think the other thing, too, that I would say, just because I know sometimes there's a little bit of a question mark over the relationship between government and the security research community. In a lot of cases, I know that there's been certain instances where we haven't necessarily seen eye to eye. But if Travis was hinting at this point earlier, if we can't talk directly to the experts that we need in order to understand an issue, don't assume that means that we're not talking to anyone. It just means that gap, that policy gap, is being filled by trade associations and tech companies and other groups that have something that they want to get out of it. It's not tech expertise for tech expertise's sake. And so the value of having unbiased, objective experts that we can call up, I really, really can't overstate it. Sorry, I'm grinning because I see Josh Corman sitting in the audience, and Josh has been pretty instrumental. Am The Cavalry has been instrumental in a lot of the things that I've been able to get done. So I will stop rambling at that, but just really to underline what Travis has been saying, it's hard to overstate the value of having tech experts directly in Congress.
Maurice, do you want to actually, maybe we could start with Maurice and then go just talk about your experience and what you're working on now?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. I feel like it's a real honor to be able to share my experience, and hopefully it'll inspire some people to recognize that they can make a difference despite how daunting the task might seem. I've been interested in technology for a little bit longer than I've been interested in government, and I've been interested in government since I was in 8th grade. I knew that I always wanted to work in government. I went straight from high school and undergrad on the political science track, and then went right into my master's in public administration. So I really embrace the notion that I am a bureaucrat. I don't think that that's a nasty word. I think that we do need people who are professionals at getting things through the legislative process and getting them implemented, because government is everywhere. It just depends on which level of government you want to look at, and it takes people who know how to get things done in order to have these services that we all really enjoy, and sometimes maybe even don't even know that we get. On the technology side, I can say that it's been instrumental in my life to be able to have this technical background while also pursuing government administration, because there needed to be some experts in the room when we're having these conversations about policy and implementation, because the worst thing that can happen is that you have a bunch of people who are really good at making policy, but don't have the experience or the knowledge about really how things get implemented, and they make a bunch of rules, and then those rules are either misinterpreted or taken advantage of, or just, quite frankly, counterbalanced toward one side, and the outcome isn't what people want. And so I think opportunities like Tech Congress are unique in that it brings expertise into a conversation that has been lacking expertise. And during my time in the Senate last year, I was on HISGAC, which is a horribly sounding acronym for Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. I was able to have an impact straight away. I really thought that, okay, this is the time where I can help out staff, I can help out the member, I can help out the committee, really get an understanding of how technology, as Travis was stating before, is the crust underlying so many major issues. It was a fantastic time to come in and be a technologist in Congress. Unfortunately, we had a lot of malware attacks and other issues like email servers that were up for discussion. Most importantly for me, I was inspired by learning about election security. So about this time last year, came to DEF CON for the first time and went to the voting machine hacking village. That changed the course of my life. I can't underestimate that enough. I think folks like Josh can appreciate it. Once you see a problem so acutely and you recognize the impact that it can have, sometimes you literally feel inspired that you need to get in there and get your hands dirty. And so that's what I'm doing now. After my time in the Senate, I went ahead and joined the Center for Democracy and Technology, and now I'm actually a technologist, a position that didn't necessarily exist. We have a chief technologist, but now I'm a senior technologist at CDT, and I'm working on election cybersecurity because I feel so strongly about it. I have a background of civic engagement, so when I'm not at work, I like to be involved in the community, and I feel like elections are probably one of the few areas where just about anyone can get excited about. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but just that notion that our democracy is built on a person having a voice in their government, and that voice being expressed through casting a vote for their representative. And there's something very powerful about that, and so I believe that we need to make sure that there's a level of accountability that comes along with that. And that's why I feel strongly about working at CDT, because I could have a certain amount of power on the inside, but I believe that would have been limited to just speaking with staff or the member or the committee. But on the outside, as was mentioned before, there are plenty of offices that are interested in engaging outside expertise. And so I feel like if I can play a role at CDT and be the voice on the other end of that phone call, or be the response on the other end of that email, providing that expertise that makes for good policy, that I can have an outsized impact. And so that's where I really feel like I'm able to leverage my background in administration, but also in technology, to be able to help make those laws better on the implementation side. The only thing worse than having no laws about something is having bad laws about something, because either way, it takes a long time to get it changed. So I try to do what I can to make it right the first time.
Catherine, you want to talk for a minute or two about your experience and maybe one or two of the things you've been working on or
Sure.
hoping to work on?
So My name is Catherine. I am in Susan Delbene's office in the House, and I was very lucky to sort of have the opportunity to work with someone who actually has a tech background. So she had a biotech startup. She worked for Microsoft. She actually understands and sort of speaks the same language as I do about privacy and security. So my dissertation research is about neural security and private information. If you want to learn more, shameless shout out, I'm talking at Biohacking Village on Saturday at DEF CON, so you can come hear about it there. But through my work in neural security, I've realized we're not going to pass a bill right now in neural security, but we can talk a lot about privacy in general. So what are the ways that we can talk about privacy so that people actually understand it? Or how can we talk about technology so that we can say there's disparate impacts of different kinds of technology? So most of you probably read Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, his blog post from a couple of weeks ago talking about how government should regulate the use of facial recognition by the government. And so seeing as Microsoft is in our district, we decided that we should have an answer to that question. So I got to sort of delve in and say, what is facial recognition? What are the issues with it? What are the disparate impacts? And what should we be doing with it? So that memo went to the boss, and we'll see how that goes from there. But sort of taking an issue that suddenly comes to the forefront, whether it's data privacy, whether it's facial recognition, whether it's the robots are taking all of our jobs, how can you frame it in a way that it matters to the members' constituents? So how can you make sure that it's something that they'll be interested in, so that you're not sort of, I guess, taking time or trying to find a home for it, you're actually making it relevant. So
Awesome. Let me just run down the line.
Hi, my name is John Price. I work for Senator Cory Gardner from the great state of Colorado. Go Broncos. I'm a prior special operations soldier and intel community member. I think for me, I was always frustrated being on one side of the pointy end of the spear, if you will, and trying to always get the right technology to the place that I was at to do my job. And it was very frustrating to never do that. And so to be able to interface with leaders and explain the types of technology that we need to get into our government to modernize it and to protect infrastructure is really an opportunity that I feel very fortunate for every day, because you can see the tangible impacts by giving people a platform, not just talking to yourself, but people like Bo Woods and Josh Corman to come in and speak with the staff members, because like we talked about previously, they're starting really from very much behind the power curve. So it's a really unique opportunity. It's really a great point in time, I think, because a lot of people are very receptive, and even though Congress is very much behind, this is something that I think, as Travis has talked about before, which is what do you say? Like it's pre-partisan.
Yeah.
Technology. So a lot of these issues aren't left or right. So it's an education issue, and that's really a great opportunity to sit down with the staff and members. Thanks.
So my name is Colin Anderson. I work on the Senate side as a Tech Congress Fellow. I don't want to associate my scurrilous comments with my boss, so I'll just leave it there. I want to start with one thing, which is what's particularly interesting is that my first time at Black Hat and DEF CON was 3 years ago. In the fervor and panic around the Wassenaar arrangements, export controls on penetration testing, or rather intrusion software, i.e. government-grade malware and certain malware products, which then started to look like pen testing products. And what's interesting is that there tends to be every 3 or 4 years this panic in the cybersecurity community about, oh God, they're touching this thing. This makes me feel uncomfortable, and particularly given the substantial libertarian streak that exists in our community, or anarchist streak, or these sorts of things. This is especially compounds to this general concern. I actually I think that it has been interesting and valuable for all of the reasons that have been expressed to have people with tech expertise in order to say, okay, maybe the core principle is something that we all agree on, which is, hey, maybe we should have some oversight over like NSO providing O-days for iPhones to like the UAE government, which are going to be potentially used for human rights abuses or used to target the U.S. Embassy, which was the case in Mexico. There are human rights and national security concerns about that, which might lead to a real reason for there to be some sort of control. Having tech people there in order to make sure that we can separate where possible these types of activities and not have a chilling effect is great. However, I don't think that, I think that's I can make a harder sell or a better sell, which is ultimately what is fascinating is that this is the U.S. Congress. This is a powerful institution that speaks with a very loud voice, and that's a platform. And what you've seen, Chris Soghoian has been mentioned several times. What you saw is you had somebody who was a civil society activist who loved to troll like whomever, given the day, Google over Android updates and security and how that related to vulnerable communities. Take that skill set and that interest and operationalize it within the tools available within this environment. And so I think the better pitch is actually, you don't have to pariah yourself. You don't have to go and like lay down your body in front of the Congress in order to like stop terrible legislation. There's a real opportunity here. There's a real opportunity to start to use things like, one of the ways in which we're going to get better IoT security is through putting stipulations on U.S. government contracts in order to make sure that items that the U.S. government buys at least doesn't have default passwords. And companies are not going to have a U.S. government kit and then a commercial kit. You're going to raise everyone's level. And so what you start to get through these, or, actually what I was surprised by was the thing that I do most is I write letters. The things that I think most of the people on this panel have done most is write letters. And when you write letters, those letters get paid attention to. And so you get these like different toolkits, procurement standards, oversight, letters, publicity, inquiries, hearings, questions, all of that. Also towards people who would never talk to you in person, like you would never get to in real life. And they all become tools to pursue these sorts of ends, which I think that we all agree on. And I think that this also bodes well, or this connects well with the past presentation, which is that there's a lot of opportunity for somebody of the skill set that would come in, or the interest that would come into BSides, and to start to leverage that and be the reversal of that pitch. The computer scientists going in with the English majors and contributing their valuable skill set, but ultimately you can go in for a couple of years and you can really start to see how these systems function. And there's a huge opportunity to pursue things. Mine is, I think malware should die. And, like building from that ethos, what are the things that we can start to do towards improving general security for the public and kind of improving our defenses overall. And I think that that's a tool and an opportunity rather than some sort of social obligation in order to defend the community against the ignorance of the U.S. Congress, this 800-pound gorilla in the room. I've gone too long. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. Well,
Chief Marketing Officer.
Would love to open up a conversation about what Congress is working on, what it's not working on, where the opportunities are. Yeah, we'll go there and there.
Hey, so there's a common trope that, if only we didn't have so many old white men in Congress, technology policy would be better. And I don't know whether that's true or not, but it always just struck me as odd because there are certainly a lot of old white men in the InfoSec community that certainly know what they're talking about. And a lot of the people who are advising these older people in Congress are younger staff that have a deep understanding. So I'm wondering whether you have any sense of, is that really true? I mean, if all of a sudden every member of Congress and every senator was 40 and from the technology community, would that really help that much? Or where are the real problems? Is it really one of just geriatric lawmaking?
So in repeating that, I guess for the sake of the live stream, the question has to do with whether or not Congress is maybe a little bit older than we'd like in terms of technology policy, since technology is a little bit newer. At least cybersecurity is a little bit newer than maybe some of those folks are used to. Speaking as I think the congressional staffer on the panel, and Travis can back me up as a former one here too, I think one of the things that it's difficult to understand until you actually work in Congress is how much staff are relied upon. And so your member, any given member of Congress is a member of several different committees. So they're on the Agriculture Committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Armed Services Committee. And they're probably experts in one of those areas, but not all of those areas. And so what happens is that they have a legislative assistant or somebody, the one staffer who's a specialist in that area, and then they go to that staffer when an issue comes up and they ask them. And so I guess to answer your question, would it be helpful if more members of Congress understood technology on a really deep level? Of course, absolutely. I think we've seen that happen in some cases with Congressman Hurd, Congressman Langevin, who do have some of those tech backgrounds. But at the same time, I think the getting staff in who understand this at a really deep level is probably a more immediately impactful way to really up the level of expertise.
I also don't know that it's an age issue. I mean, we make laws. In order to make laws, typically you're a lawyer. There's not a lot of technical understanding in law school, so they're kind of already put behind the power curve, and that's why they have to rely on, as was just explained, the younger staffers to make them smart on the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, for example, Senator Ed Markey, who's, he was in the Congress, he's been around for a couple of, I think
40 years.
Yeah. Wrote the '96 Communications Act. He's tech savvy, but he's not necessarily a technical expert. I think that what you need is offices that give space and to cultivate those communities. I thought actually one of the most interesting set of questions, although not perfectly executed in the Zuckerberg hearing, was actually Roy Blunt was asking about cross-device tracking. And I was just sitting there, I was like, wow, that, somebody knew to ask that and, prepared that and put together a good set of questions. And a lot of that preparation is done at the staff level. And so I think that if you were to rank them, it's in the one hand, it might be necessary but not sufficient. But also, I think it's more important to have the staff in place and in the right offices than necessarily to have senators that are digital natives or are, experts themselves. You just need the people that are really tracking it on a daily basis and especially are able to follow the fast pace of change and to come out to these spaces and to be able to be that resource for their boss at the end of the day when it matters.
I'd like to see more diversity on the Senate side. I know that the House tends to trend a little younger, and so there is definitely more diversity as far as ethnicity and also gender. But I don't think it's an old white man problem. I think it's more of an issue of, at least from my perspective, I don't like it when people seem to wear ignorance as a badge of honor. Why would you only send 4 emails in a year? It's like either you use email or you don't use email, but to say I send so few emails, I'm not sure what that's supposed to convey. I'd prefer to see members who are more open-minded about what they know and what they don't know, and to actually be better managers from the standpoint of knowing what issues they think they can have an impact on or are within their area, within their jurisdiction of their committee. And then say, you know what, we really need to staff up in X area, or we need an expert from this field to come join staff so that we can be more effective in our policy solutions.
Great. So question there, and then.
So I'm an old white geek who, after I retired, I had unfortunately to live in Northern Virginia, wanted to get more interested in policy, so I do, through the Am The Cavalry stuff, bug both my congresswoman and my 2 senators on cyber issues. And I recognize that, yeah, we need more of you, but I'm an old retired lazy person, so I'm not going to volunteer to actually work for you. That's a lot of work. But I will volunteer to help, and I have found that it's actually hard to help. That it's first of all, there's a lot of issues. And second of all, it's hard to find the right information. My main source of information on things to bug my congresswoman and senator on are through the IATC Slack channel, which is a great Slack channel and it's good for doing it, but I think we collectively need some better way to get, like it really should be lots of people doing what I'm doing and bugging their senator, but you need to get them the information, and it's not easy. Or I'm missing something. Maybe it's easy.
Jessica, do you want to field that?
I can feel
Yeah.
it.
I think it's
So I guess the question, and tell me if I paraphrase this
How
wrong.
do I get the information to help you guys?
Yeah.
and my
Sure,
senator?
sure. So how to get the proper information to Congress so that we have the information that we need, so that our bosses have the information that we need. I think so. This is something that we struggle with as staff in general. I think of what issues we should be covering. Obviously, things that make huge newspaper headlines are something that are probably going to land on our desks one way or another.
But at that point, it's too late, actually. You want to
Yes and no.
prepped you prior to that.
I mean, I think that's just the nature of the beast. In a lot of cases, is that Congress, to a certain extent, is always going to be reactionary. We're always going to be looking at what we're going to be reacting to what the nation is reacting to. That is the nature of our jobs. But in terms of what information we need, honestly, sometimes it's not what information we think we need. We don't know what we don't know and what we should know. And so I think maybe the best example I can come up with is something that's been talked about a lot the last couple of days is software bill of materials, where 2014, 4 years ago, a certain I Am The Cavalry member walked into our committee offices and brought up the idea of software bill of materials. And I didn't quite laugh him out of the meeting, but it was pretty close. And then...
At the same time, I hit my senator on it, so maybe
well,
you actually got enough that you care about.
yeah, I mean, it was a series of events. I mean, it was Josh, for those of you who weren't able to guess that. He sort of kept up on it, and over the course of 4 years, there was enough of a groundswell of support for it, an idea that really was a common sense idea, that by May, I guess, when the task force report came out, for the big healthcare task force report came out, it was just an official government recommendation. My committee came out in support of it a couple of months later. Now the NTIA is doing it. And so sometimes we don't know the things that we should be working on. And so if there's something that you're just incredibly passionate about and you think that we should be paying attention to and aren't paying attention to it, like, screw what we think we need to be talking about. Like, you come tell us.
yeah, that's
I
great.
can add a little bit to that from a more pragmatic approach. If there's an issue you care about, figure out which member is also caring about it, and then also which committee may have jurisdiction over it.
That's true.
And
How to do that is not trivial, by the way. You know how to do that.
we weren't born knowing how to do it, so it definitely, by design, Congress is opaque, and what's up on a hill, shiny buildings and all that, and it's kind of awe-inspiring. But then in the day, you realize, it's got basements and people, and they do work, and so the sheen kind of comes off of it if you spend a little bit of time in there. But seriously, go check out the committee. If you're interested in cars, go find out which committee has some jurisdiction over cars. And then,
By the way, every committee will answer what she did. And they'll say, well, it's this aspect, because we have to do with, I don't know, this particular agency or this aspect.
and that's fine. It would be really overwhelming to try to track all cybersecurity legislation across committees on both sides. So just pick a committee. Maybe it's energy and commerce, and then just take a look at their calendar. Once a month, once every couple of weeks, and see when they're going to have hearings, or track them on Twitter, or take a look at their press room and see which letters are they sending out, which signals are they giving out to the public to show, yes, I'm working on this issue because I care about it, because my constituents care about it.
Or legislation.
Yeah.
I don't know about Senator Kaine, but I've worked fairly closely with Senator Warner's staff, and they have a standing rule where if you are a Virginian, you can walk in the office and set an appointment with.
I was shocked. I walked in and met him. I just couldn't believe it.
It's more common than you think.
Yeah. Most offices, from my experience, at least have an open door policy, especially for constituents. And so, you might not get the most high level meeting, but you'll probably get a meeting and somebody will listen to you. Yeah. And it might even, we'll take meetings for non-constituents as well on certain areas, and especially if they have expertise. Look for legislation also. See who's doing what, who's sending what letters, who's co-signing such letters. You don't have to know the entire world. I actually know less about what's happening in the House now that I'm on the Senate side. And that might be like some biases, but you don't have to attack the entire piece of the puzzle, or the entire puzzle. You just have to take a piece, and I think that that will be an enormously valuable contribution. And ultimately, what you want, really, what is a successful meeting is not a meeting in which you have written legislation. It is a meeting in which a staff member now trusts you and might proactively reach out to you and might make connections. And so you start to facilitate those sorts of relationships. And maybe in advance of a hearing, you reach out and say, hey, I noticed that the NTIA head is going to be there. Here's some questions about software bill of materials that might be helpful. And everyone wins in that situation because you've just gotten a set of questions in. The staff member looks like they're smart, and the member of Congress looks prepared. Everyone wins in that situation, and you just have to start with that, building up that trust relationship.
Building trust. So, Josh.
Right, it's a hard question. We only have 9 minutes left or so, and recognize that some people listening to your answer on video or whatnot may not politically or ideologically agree. A couple of you mentioned an IoT bill, so I helped a lot with some of the framing of any IoT should be patchable, should have a coordinated disclosure program, probably shouldn't have a fixed password like admin. These are pretty common sense things, and yet there's revolt and foamation and weeping and gnashing of teeth and all sorts of violent reactions from our friends. In part because any legislation is bad. The question is, I guess, if we can't agree on you shouldn't have a hard-coded password amongst this community, are there any changes or advice you would give this demographic that's been coming to the desert for 26 years to be more nuanced, to be more strategic about these little wins? Like, how do we better represent the entire industry? Because I can talk to you, some of our friends can talk to you, but ultimately, if like an A-list hacker says, "Oh, it's a terrible idea to get rid of default passwords," it sends mixed signals. So, is there any advice or challenge you would give, constructive challenge, to the attitudes of the general hacker population that's here this week?
Yes. So, advice to give to the hacker community on how to better engage with each other when it comes to policy and better engage with policymakers. And I would say 2 things. I'm going to say the second one first because it's a little bit easier, and it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I mean it as seriously as I can. Be careful what you wish for when it comes to legislation. It is incredibly difficult to get passed, and it is nearly impossible to undo once it's done. So if you want to put something technical into legislation, you better be damn sure that you've thought through all of the consequences, because if you convince the Congress to pass something, and you can, and then it turns out to have really horrendous consequences, we're probably stuck with it for a long time. So just patience when it comes to legislation, and just be very, very thoughtful, because legislation is a very big hammer, and it can cause a lot of damage if it's wielded wrong. The second thing that I would say is you got to be patient with policymakers. You got to be patient with the lack of expertise that it's going to come out of, and you have to be patient with the process. I mean, I've been on the Hill for 5 years now, and I still get blindsided sometimes by how the institution works. You can have a perfectly sensible piece of legislation that everyone can agree on, but it hits the committee, and then in the subcommittee markup, something goes wrong, something gets said, it gets misconstrued. It manages to eke out of the subcommittee, and then it goes to the committee, and then it goes to the House, but then it doesn't pass the Senate. I mean, there's so much that can go wrong, and it's not because of the people. It's not because the policy is bad. It's just because Congress is such a unique institution, and it has a bunch of unique institutional rules that are really hard to overcome. And so I guess the way that I would say it is, in the same way that I think Congress and policymakers have had to really understand and reach out to the information security community and really understand what that is, differentiating out what it means to be a hacker versus what it means to be a white hat or a gray hat or any of these other things, coming around to the idea of coordinated disclosure instead of thinking that we need to sue in those kinds of cases. We need the same kind of understanding reflected back at us in terms of the barriers and the obstacles and the things that we have to deal with when we're trying to make good policy, when we're trying to help with tech. And it's not always as easy as it seems. So I would say, again, be careful what you wish for when it comes to legislation, and to, just have some empathy for us as we continue to struggle and we continue to try and evolve.
I think there's a couple of good examples from the Wassenaar discussion, actually. And what you saw a number of people from this community, like Katie Maurice and Rapid 7, stay engaged in a very, very vitriolic conversation. And I think the lessons out of that were, sometimes you're not going to win. It's kind of damage mitigation. And that is a slow process, and you're not going to get 100%. You might not even get 50%. But at the end of the day, being involved in the conversation is immensely valuable in terms of adding technical expertise, but also some of the loud voices in this community are very toxic voices as well, and lend to a toxic conversation, and I think stigmatizes the entire community for staff. And so for people to be kind of able to engage reasonably amicably, even when they're not going to get their desired outcome, still ultimately is beneficial towards the process, is beneficial towards the thing after, where it might not be so zero sum. And I think that you've seen the community shift into more of that role productively. I think through the work of I Am The Cavalry. I think it's through some of the smaller companies, the Rapid Sevens, which isn't so small anymore. But I think that kind of just like protracted engagement is as important as going on being very critical or being very smart one time and then never coming back ever again.
I'll follow up with two quick points. One, politics is always in play. Like, it's just, you can have the best technical solution and you can feel it in your heart that this is the best way to solve a problem, but if you're not considering the political aspects of it, it's not going to go anywhere. And the second is, leading off of that, that's where organizations that are off the Hill also play a role, like my organization, CDT. We are very happy to be in the middle and try to reach out to all sides of a discussion, anyone who wants to be involved. And we're happy to have those conversations on the record or even on background. There may not even be any sort of acknowledgement that those meetings took place, because there are just some times where the conversation needs to be frank and open, and some people aren't willing to have that political hit, or they don't want to deal with the political ramifications of having that kind of discussion. But just based on some of the institutional rules and the political rules, those discussions need to happen in order for progress to happen. So just be aware of that.
So let's take any remaining questions all at once. We've got one over here.
I'm just curious to hear, given the nature of the political landscape right now, what policies or legislation that you're all aware of that you think have the best chance of succeeding in this climate that you guys are maybe focused on?
What might Congress actually pass? What else? Yeah.
Is there a right or a wrong background for a tech Congress fellow?
Okay. Yeah. Great.
All right. So
Yeah.
we talked about how to get people from tech backgrounds into Congress, but the one thing we never really talked about is money, because going from a six-figure InfoSec job to a $50,000 maybe fellowship on the Hill.
80.
Oh, wait, $80,000.
Sorry, we're increasing next year. These guys are at 75.
$80,000 in Washington, D.C. of all places is going to be kind of a big hit. So how exactly do you plan to get people interested even after that huge?
That's a great question. Any others? Why don't we start? Do you all? How are we on time? 2 minutes? 1 minute. Real quick. Any immediate, like 15 seconds? What would Congress actually pass?
To be completely honest, considering that at least in the House it's an election year and it's midterms and it's a very fractious political election, and we have about 3 weeks left of legislative time, nothing. There will probably be nothing.
But stuff still moves. Even if you kind of externally get the impression that Congress is dysfunctional, which it might or might not be true, stuff still moves. And so look at the National Defense Authorization Act or the omnibus spending package. There was for a moment there was IoT on the NDA. There's a lot of cybersecurity. Look at the Russia sanctions bill that's coming up right now. And so there might not be like things that stand out, but stuff gets attached to must pass, and that those bills are often very important and are opportunities. And so it's still happening.
Great. That's how some men got the open data bill passed, was through NDAA. Good point. On the questions of money, it's a problem. I mean, it's a real sacrifice. And we're at the level that we're at because we want people, if they want to stay, to be able to move up. Congress doesn't pay enough. I mean, these are bigger. Congress has cut its own budget 35% in real dollar terms since 2010. That's a real big, and I don't know the answer to that. But it does require a sacrifice. What we can say in return is that you get to do a kick-ass job on issues that you really care about, with a direct line to a member of Congress that can really make things happen. On the question of right skills or wrong skills, right skills, technical ability, and ability to get things done and be able to translate. You need to be able to communicate. That's the most important piece. You'll see that all of these folks are excellent communicators. That's really important. Wrong skills, not willing to work well on teams. You got to be able to, it's super collaborative. So
I'll say, for what I gave up in money, I gained tenfold in relationships, access, and those things will pay off later in life much more than 1 year's salary.
And that's why we view it as a tour duty model. Awesome. Thanks everybody for coming.